It is my pleasure to introduce Lori Fox, who is the Horticulture Associate at the Virginia Tech Hampton Roads Agricultural Research and Extension Center. She is a native of Richmond, Virginia, and has a PhD in horticulture from the Netherlands, where her focus area was on phytoremediation. She also holds a bachelor's and master's degree in horticulture from North Carolina State University, where she studied landscape design, ornamental plant production, and weed science. She spent 3 years serving as the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service county agent. She was a weed scientist at the Virginia Tech Hampton Roads AREC for 1 year before transitioning to her current position of horticulture associate. She currently works on water quality, including stormwater and nutrient management in the landscape, urban stormwater best management practices, including floating treatment wetlands, and aquatic weed ID and management in ponds, as well as her work in sustainable landscapes, where she focuses on sustainable landscape design and practices, native plants, buffer zones, and rain gardens. She's the Hampton Roads AREC tour coordinator and oversees 8 of the 28 public demonstration gardens. She's an author and the publisher of the book Best Plants for Hampton Roads, a landscape and garden companion. She's a contributor to the Native Plants for Southeast Virginia, including Hampton Roads Plant Guide, which is part of the Plant Virginia Natives Initiative. She's the former coordinator of the Virginia Flower and Garden Expo, an educational advisor to the Virginia Nursery and Landscape Association and Tidewater Community College. And she's a steering committee member and level 1 trainer for the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. And with that, I will turn it over to, one more thing. You feel free to put questions into the chat as we go, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. If you have any technical questions, drop those in as well, and myself or Karen will help you. All right, and I'll turn it over to Lori.
Okay, well, there we go. Can everybody see the full screen now? All right, so I was invited to be on the program this evening. Good evening, everyone, to talk about native trees and shrubs, but from the standpoint of landscaping and designing with them, and also use of the smaller ones that for our smaller landscapes. So let's jump into it. I tend to talk fast, so fasten your seat belts. I tend to look at landscaping as a puzzle, or landscape design as a puzzle. You have to take all these pieces of information and then put them together in a way that creates the vision or the picture or the design that you're trying to create for yourself or for a client. And so when you do this, there's some things you need to kind of have and think about. And I think a lot of landscape design deals with attitude. You've got to have the bigger picture vision of what you're trying to accomplish. You have to be educated and up to date on information, or do the research to get information so that you make smart choices. You have to have patience, and sometimes if plan A doesn't work, you need plan B and C and even D. And then also patience, because you're dealing with living things, and you know, it's not instantaneous, despite what you might have seen on HGTV. You need flexibility. Again, every site is different. Every client's needs are different. All your environmental conditions are different, and you have microclimates within one site. So you have to be a little flexible. You know, you can't get plant A. You need to have a backup plant B that will work. Or, you know, flexible with your timeline or your budget. All of that is important. And then you have to be a pioneer. You have to be willing to try new and different things. One size, one pattern, one design, one plant doesn't fit every situation. So you have to keep all these things in mind, and how you deal with them, the attitude that you have, how you think about things, goes a long way towards making sure that what you're doing is successful. The information that you need client information. Who are they? What are they doing with the site? What do they want? What is their vision? And this happens if you're the client as well. What are all the environmental conditions at that point in time, at different points in the season, different times of the day? Um, and then all the plant information. You need to know your plants or be able to find good information about them to match up all of these things together to create that completed puzzle. So let's talk about some of the situations where you might want to use native trees or shrubs in a landscape. And there's more than this, I'm sure. But these are the ones that come up, I think, most frequently in questions or extension questions and programs, or things that I get from people question wise. So let's take a look. So understory. So we've all seen situations where all the understory has been cleared away, and usually this occurs um, in two situations most commonly: development, where we're saving the trees, and so they do, and these are like trees with very high canopies, and everything underneath them has been cleared out. So basically, you've got telephone pole trees, or you've got somebody who really is not knowledgeable about understanding the importance of canopy layers, of plants growing in communities as opposed to individual plants. And they either don't know and clear things out, or some unscrupulous, um, less than knowledgeable landscape company sells them on the idea of clearing everything out. And now you have to go back in and sort of repopulate that understory layer with the trees and the shrubs that need to be there. Um, and oh, go. Okay. And that could be a combination of understory trees and shrubs and herbaceous material as well. It is, I encourage you to think twice before you clear out understory plantings, because it is one of the most challenging situations in a landscape to go in and try and establish new plants beneath existing mature plants. It's a very challenging situation. Here's another one. Where is that middle canopy layer? You can tell that there had been one. It's not there now. And they went straight from the larger trees right to the lower shrub layer. There is no herbaceous ground cover layer, and there's no mid-story canopy layer here. So that's one situation. This happens to be my house. As you can see, I have mature loblolly pines. I do have the live oak over the driveway, and there is a magnolia tree in the backyard. And so I don't have a lot of sun. I have a lot of understory, areas. And so what I did, I wanted to incorporate some native shrubbery and small trees in my landscape. And it's very hard with that much root competition. So what I ended up doing, actually, you'll see over here in front of the car, sort of the best sun on the site is right there at the end of the driveway up near the house. And I now have my understory, or the beginnings of it, in containers. So sometimes being that pioneer, thinking outside the box, if you can't grow it in the ground, there's nothing wrong with growing it in a container, and maybe trying something new and different. And there it is. And I do have quite a few shrubs in here, some of which we're going to talk about later. I have buttonbush. I have the black and red chokeberries. I have the summer sweet as well. As you can see, the gardenia over here. So I have some non-natives as well. So, all right. So another reason you might want to incorporate native trees and shrubs in the landscape is for pollinator support. That is something that is very on trend right now, and very sort of ecologically responsible. And there are a lot of these plants that support the pollinators, not just the bees, hummingbirds, the butterflies, the moths. If you haven't heard the name Doug Ptolemy, look it up. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a minute. And then some of these plants are very specific in the pollinators and insects that they support. Others are more generalist and support a wide range of pollinators. But this is all information that you can look up. And if this is one of the criterias that you're interested in, for selecting your plant material, that information is available. And we're going to go over some resources later. You can also incorporate plants, trees and shrubs for habitat and food. So habitat for wildlife, pollinators, birds, things like that, and food for those creatures. You can see the baby woodpecker up here in the picture on the right. So kind of matching up again the plant with the client's criteria, with the site conditions, with if the client wants to attract woodpeckers or I don't know, bluebirds or whatever it is they want to attract wildlife wise, pick the right plant to bring those to the landscape. But then the plants can also check another box. It doesn't have to be all about the critters. They can provide food for us as well. So there are nut trees. Native nut trees are highly, highly underrated. And you don't see them sold often, but they do play a big part, in our ecosystems. And then the pawpaws, of course, that's our largest native fruit tree. And incorporating those into the landscape for us, as well as the other ecosystem benefits that they provide. So it's not just all about the critters. We need to take into account our wants and needs as well in some cases. Stormwater management. So this is a huge request that comes in, too much, too fast. What do I do? It's not all coming off of my property. It's coming off of other people's property on my property. So there are a wide variety of stormwater management practices that can be utilized in landscapes, and plants play a large role in these practices. And you can also, if you're like planning at the city level, you can incorporate trees, like on the picture on the left here. You can get credit and use the trees to actually actively manage stormwater. They do it anyway, but you can incorporate them with some other technologies and enhance what the benefits are. But just planting trees and tree canopy is so critical for stormwater management, because it handles stormwater in a variety of different ways. And the name of the game now is slow it down, spread it out, soak it in, so you're not funneling it, concentrating it, and contributing to the volume and the velocity overload that we have. And that's again why canopy layering is so very important. So if you're working towards getting credits or restoring areas or something like that with canopy layers for stormwater, it's a lot of good information out there. And then that is kind of a larger scale, but on a smaller individual residential scale, again, there are practices, things like rain gardens. And Extension has a series of publications on the 6 most common stormwater management practices for homeowners. And a lot of these have plants incorporated in them, because it's a combination, again, of technology and the plants that you're utilizing them to absorb stormwater, filter the water, help it infiltrate. So check out some of those resources. And you don't have to worry about this. Stacy told you there's a handout in the chat that lists all of the resources I'm going to cover. And yes, it also is going to list all of the plants I'm going to talk about. So you can go back and get it later, or you can download it and make notes on it as we go through the presentation. Another reason you might incorporate native trees and shrubs into a landscape is you're transitioning. Maybe you have a landscape that's predominantly non-native plants, and you want to, slowly but surely move in the direction of incorporating more natives into your landscape. So this is a picture from my friend's yard, Jeanette, and she made a decision to reduce the amount of turf grass and incorporate more native plants. Now, um, generally you don't, it's not easy to have a landscape that has 100% native plants. It can be done, but I think the research and the reasoning and Doug Ptolemy and what he's talking about says if you can at least get 70% is really, really good. But anything that you can do is better than doing nothing. So she wanted big swaths of perennials for a lot of color and interest all year long. But she also did some what I call infrastructure or keystone or critical plants that are the woodies. And so she's got three of her shrubs here, and then she's got a small sweet bay magnolia tree here. Um, so those are kind of the structural plants that are in there, and then the beautiful perennials come and dress it up. And this is really cool the way she laid this out. She laid it out with a hose. You can see that. She marked where certain plants were going to go with flags and things. You can see she's planting it in phases. And then for the shrubs, she did something really, really smart. She cut out pieces of cardboard the size of the mature canopy of the plant. So she would know how wide it was going to get, and then put it on the ground and then spray painted around it. So she knew how to place those plants because she was planning for the long term and the mature size of them when she was putting them in. And that's really important with the woodies because it's very easy to put the wrong plant in the wrong place, and all of a sudden it just gets too big for the site. So, and then this is the garden a year later. The shrubs are still there. They're still right here in front of the this penstemon. And then she's actually here explaining what she's doing and showing somebody her beautiful new sweet bay magnolia. So. All right, and then another reason that you might incorporate natives into your landscape is restoration. Maybe, again, all the undergrowth was taken out, or maybe it's a newly developed site and there isn't anything there and you're trying to restore plant communities. Maybe you're trying to stabilize a shoreline or something like that. And then this picture I thought was really great because one of the things you have to think about when you're doing this is the time gap between when you actually plant something and when it gets to the size that it's supposed to, so that it will then fulfill the vision or the design that you're trying to create. And that's part of that patience attitude that you've got to have. It takes a while for trees to grow, for shrubs to grow and fill in. And that's why it's so important to think twice before, removing vegetation. I know there's always times where you have to, but this remove it and don't worry about that because I'll plant later or plant back. That doesn't fly anymore because again, there's a huge time gap and it could be decades before the plants grow and fill in if they survive. So yeah, have a little bit of patience there. And then this is kind of what it looks like in practice. So you see the waterway in the right, and then what they are doing here is all of these white tubes that you see, there are tree seedlings in those tubes. And what the tubes do, a couple of things, they protect them from deer browsing, and then they also force the tree seedlings to grow upright very, very quickly so that they develop a canopy that gets up very quick. And then is not susceptible to deer browsing. And so they come in and mow to keep the grass from being so competitive. And then at some point in time, they do come in and remove those tubes once the seedlings start kind of poking up through the top. All right, so those are just different situations to think about, or it could just be as easy as you want a new tree or a new shrub in your landscape to replace something, or because you heard about it and want to try something new, or you're interested in attracting certain wildlife to your yard. So there's all kinds of reasons. So then the question becomes, how do you acquire these plants. And there's a wide variety of places that you can get them more easily now than you could before. A lot of your nurseries and garden centers carry native plants now. You can get them at plant sales. Go to plant sales where the people that are doing the sale have some knowledge of what they're selling so that you're kind of assured that things are labeled correctly, or if you have questions you can get them answered. It's a little bit uh, dicey if you go to plant giveaways, unless you're pretty knowledgeable about what you're looking for and all. But there are some very successful plant giveaways. Cities do things for like Arbor Day activities. There's different grassroots organizations that have adopt a live oak, or adopt a tree, like Friends of the Live Oaks, or Elizabeth River Project has the adopt a tree. The Arbor Day people give away trees. Your forestry service does in some cases. Your just different organizations. So those could be good sources. You can purchase things online, of course. And then also don't discount the friends and family that you could get things from, digging up redbud seedlings out of the neighbor's yard, or your friend's yard, or something like that. So there's more opportunities now to get native plants than there ever have been before. So that's a good thing. What form are you going to acquire the plant in? With the woodies, they run the gamut. You can have everything from bare root plants to things that are in little like seedling cups or tubelings. They're called different things, but you can see that they're mass produced in these small containers. And then you can go buy them in large containers, like in the bottom right. That's like a 15-gallon sized pot there, with a larger root ball, a larger tree, which gives you kind of a jump on how it's going to look when you put it in the landscape. You kind of have a more immediate effect with something that size versus a little bare root seedling. And then in the bottom left, you also have ball and burlap plants. So these are plants that are grown in the field, and then they are dug, and the roots that are left after they are dug are wrapped in burlap, which is usually then put into a metal or wire basket, tied with twine, and then you see the trunk protection, because these plants are kind of hard and awkward to move around, so they don't want to scrape up the trunks of the trees. There are pros and cons to all of these types of plant forms. And again, do your homework. It's much easier to pop a seedling in the ground than it is a 15-gallon or a ball and burlap plant. That's a much bigger hole. It's a lot more weight that you have to move around. But then again, you don't have to wait as long for it to get up to a more mature size. So, there's pros and cons. And a lot of times some of this is dictated by your budget. So let's talk resources. And I promise we're going to get to the pictures and talk about the plants, which is why we're zipping through this stuff here. If you're not sure if something is native or not, or if you are trying to find which species of a plant is native to the particular area that you live in, the digital atlas. I can't tell you how often I use this as a resource. So it's the digital atlas of the Virginia flora. And it's online, and there's an app you can get for your phone. And basically it's a searchable database. So you just go in and you can search by the scientific name or the common name, and it will come up and it will tell you if that plant is native in Virginia. So usually what you get is a map with either red or blue dots. If it has red dots, then that shows you where in that city or county in the state that it has been found and that it is native. If it's a blue dot, then it's been introduced. But the really great thing about this is it shows you which part of the state it's native in. Because when you start talking native plants, native is not enough. You have to go one or two steps further. And it's native where? Is it coastal Virginia? Is it Piedmont Virginia? Is it the mountains? You know, it's no more planting stuff that's native on the West Coast or native to the Midwest. You know, the better plants that provide more ecosystem services, that establish better, that really work better in our landscapes, are things that are specifically native to our state or to the Mid-Atlantic region and to which specific part of the state that you live in. And this is a really great way to check that. You can also go in, and if you know you want an oak tree, but you're not sure which species you want, you can just type in the genus Quercus for oak, and it will bring up all of the oaks. And then you can check to see which ones are appropriate for your area. The other feature that this uh, website has, and I haven't used it as much as the other two that I just showed you, but you can go in and actually create a list of native plants for your specific location. Um, so you can go in, and it will allow you to pick the city or the county, and then you tell it you want the vascular plant list, and it will, as opposed to the bryophytes, you want vascular plants, and then it will generate a list that you can then take that list and start researching the plants to see what might fit what you're trying to do. If the digital atlas doesn't have the information that you want, and on a few occasions it has not had what I've been looking for, or there's conflicting information, then my backup to the digital atlas is the USDA plant database, where you can go in and search, and then that will, I think, let me see, nope, let me go back. That will also bring up a lot of information about a plant, but actually, you can see down here, sort of in the middle, the map of the United States with these green areas. So it will show you on a more national level where plants are native in the United States, and this is a good backup tool to the digital atlas. Don't discount the Virginia Native Plant Society. There are quite a few chapters in Virginia, and they have valuable resources on that website, you know, about the chapters, about upcoming plant sales and events, and also about native plant nurseries where you could purchase certain plants. So that might be a good thing to bookmark as your Native Plant Society website. There's also the Regional Native Plant Marketing Campaign and the Regional Native Plant Guides that are part of that campaign, that is has been done by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the Coastal Zone Management Program. And it started out as regions along Virginia's coast, where they developed these guides very, very specific to the physiographic regions, because those are the regions that have similar climate conditions for, you know, for the growing of plants. And Virginia has these physiographic regions within the coastal, Piedmont, and mountain parts of the state. And so this is very, very specific to, you know, what geographic area of the state you live in. And so now, though, I think there's like, they're up to maybe 10 of these guides that are covering pretty much the entire state now. So these are all free and downloadable from the plantvirginianatives.org website. And again, all of this is on the handout, that you can download them. Take a look at the page number before you hit print. These are in full color, and most of them are 70 or more pages. Some of these guides, depending on what print cycle they're in, are free. So you can find out who has them in the area. Probably contact your local extension office, or if there is a coordinator for a regional marketing campaign, you can contact them, or your Native Plant Society chapter. Some of the guides, again, are for sale. This is, and it's a nominal price for such a great resource. You know, $5 to I think $10, depending on which one you're after. And that is so that that generates money to keep these guides being perpetually printed and available. But fabulous color pictures, great cultural information about the plants. And one of the key criteria for putting plants in this guide is that they are ornamental and that they are fairly easily available or easy to find. So those are good things. The Department of Conservation and Recreation's Natural Heritage Program here in Virginia has these brochures, and these are designed for coastal Piedmont and mountain areas. And then within, say, this coastal plain guide here for native plants, they break it down into herbs and vines and shrubs and trees, big trees, little trees, that sort of thing. So again, it's fairly easy, and they have some good cultural information. What you can use them for, the amount of the light that they need, the amount of moisture, things like that, so that you can help get the information to understand where the plants would grow best in the landscape. And those again are online and easy to download. If you're in a situation like on a shoreline where you've got brackish water, which we have a lot of at Hampton Roads, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science is a great resource because they take their plant recommendations and color code them as to what part of the shoreline they would grow best in. And if you look at this up here, most of your woodies are going to be in the upland bank, that section to the right that's in kind of the tan there. But really good information, and you can find this field guide on their website easily. Let's see, I already did Virginia native plants. All right, so I said Doug Ptolemy a couple of times. Doug Ptolemy is an entomologist from University of Delaware, and he has probably been one of the most influential people as far as promoting native plants in the last 5 or 6 years. The reason being, he's an entomologist, okay, but he's also a very avid bird watcher and bird supporter. And so part of what he likes to do is watch birds, especially watch birds raising their young, and understand what types of insects they are feeding their young. And so over the years, as he's done a lot of research and had grad students doing research and whatnot, the conclusion is that birds feed their young soft, squishy caterpillars because they're high in protein, they're soft for the little baby birds, as opposed to seeds or other insects like beetles that have hard shells. So, he was talking about the baby birds dying because there aren't enough caterpillars around for the birds to feed them. And birds will only fly so far in search of food. And so he directly linked the birds and their populations and their survivability to the availability of the caterpillars. And the caterpillars have to have the habitat plants to support them, and especially things like trees and shrubs. So you're not going to have baby birds if you don't have caterpillars to feed them, and you're not going to have caterpillars if you don't have the trees and shrubs that act as the host plants for those insects. And so this was his landmark book, Bringing Nature Home, but he has also written Nature's Best Hope. And since oaks, you might hear the term keystone plant. These are actually very ecosystem critical plants because of all the services that they provide. But basically, if you look up anything about Doug, and he's got websites and books, he has looked at specific species of native plants and documented how many insects those plants supports, predominantly moths and butterflies, because that's where your caterpillars come from. And oaks top the list by far. Everything else comes in a sort of a far second to oaks and the amount of support that they provide. Okay, I'm sorry, this is out of order. That's the map from the USDA plant database, so you can see where things are native or not. All right, if you are looking for ways to convince somebody to plant trees, because sometimes people are hesitant about it. I don't want a tree, it's going to fall on my house, blah, blah, blah. I don't want the roots, whatever. There are tree benefit calculators. What you do is you identify a tree, you plug in the size of it, the diameter at 4 feet above ground, and then you tell it this calculator that it's in a residential situation, and then it will calculate the value of that tree. And I think what it does here is goes down the benefits, and it breaks it down into um, air quality, like carbon dioxide uptake, the value of the tree relative to stormwater management, energy use, carbon sequestration, all of these things. And it kind of looks like, the label on the package of something you buy at the grocery store, but it breaks it down. And so again, this is something that is interesting. If some tree species are more valuable than others, if you already have existing trees and you're trying to decide if you need to take something down or not, run the benefits calculator and see. Trees, it's been documented they can add up to 15 to 20% to your property value with curb appeal. If we go back to the picture of my house, my husband and I had certain neighborhoods we were looking in when we were looking to purchase a home. All of them were neighborhoods that had mature, beautiful trees in them. And so, trees really do have an impact. And at some point, some of this value is going to connect with somebody, whether it's your property value or the cleaning of the air, the stormwater management, or something. So it's important to understand the value of the trees. All right, so let's actually look at some of these plants. And what I'm going to do is look at the straight species. And part of what the discussion tonight is about is the fact that we need sort of smaller types of plants for our smaller, more urban landscapes. And so I will not cover big trees and big shrubs. I'm looking at small and medium sized, and I'm looking at the straight species. So one of the things you also have to ask yourself before we actually get into the plants is, are you looking for the straight species, or are you looking for a cultivar of it? So a cultivar is short for cultivated variety. And it is, whether it's hybridizing or breeding or something that occurs naturally in nature, it's when man selects for that particular characteristic that's unique. Variegated leaves, flowers that are double the size, or in a lot of cases, plants that have a smaller growth habit. And so, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. Straight species always offer the most ecosystem benefits, but sometimes they just are not a suitable size, and you might need to go with a cultivar that is a smaller size. Right now, the research is saying that doesn't have a tremendous impact on the services that the plant provides. What you don't want to do is go for a cultivar that has changed the leaf color, like from solid green to burgundy, because that changes the pigments, and then that changes the ability of certain insects to eat those leaves. It's poisonous to them. The other thing you don't want to do is purchase a plant that has had a significant change to the shape or structure of the flower, because a lot of times with these native plants, they have co-evolved with the insects that pollinate them or that they support. And if you change the flower shape, and sometimes even the flower color, then the insect might not recognize it, or might not be able to get to the nectar or to the pollen in the flower. So changing the size is, for the most part, pretty okay. Changing leaf color and flower shape is not. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk about shrubs. And again, I'm not going to go over a wide variety of these. I'm going over the ones that I have found have the most benefits to them, are ornamental in the landscape, often have dwarf cultivars, are pretty easy to grow and easy to find out in the trade. All right, so witch hazel, this is a really cool one because it's sort of this medium green blob in the landscape until in the dead of winter, it blooms, because you can see it in that bottom left picture with snow on it. So, and it is, most of them are incredibly fragrant. So this is something that will give you some sort of zing in your winter landscape when you've about had enough and you're just wondering when spring is going to get here. Um, and you can use it as a good backdrop plant for other smaller shrubs or perennials or things like that. And then when that stuff is kind of dormant over the winter and this has lost its leaves, it has these amazing blooms on it, and it's just, you know, a good indicator that spring is not too far away. So hang in there. So it's a really great plant. The red and black chokeberries, these are multi-stemmed shrubs, white fragrant flowers, kind of again, a medium to a dark glossy green leaf. What is significant to these, the flowers are pretty, not there for a long period of time. But what is significant about these are the berries that they provide. These are edible for people. Again, before you eat anything, whether it's native or not, make sure you know exactly what the plant is. But they are edible. And then it has amazing fall color on these shrubs. So you can find, like, with the red chokeberry, there's a dwarf one that is almost like a ground cover, doesn't really get more than 18 inches tall. We're just trying that over at the research center. I don't, the verdict's out on that right now because it's too soon to tell how well it's going to do, and whether or not it's going to have the same type of color as the regular ones do. But these tolerate pruning really well. So if it tends to get a little bigger than you want it to, you can very easily prune it back and keep it in check. So the chokeberries are really nice. Again, for brackish water, but this grows, in moist or damp areas, and then sometimes they will also grow in dry areas. This is the baccharis or groundsel bush. And again, this is another one you can keep in check if you need to with pruning. It's really good for if you have periodic flooding or if you're in a tidal situation, because it likes it right there at the water's edge. And is really good for shoreline stabilization, has these great white blooms late in the season. And then the seeds on it are kind of like dandelion seeds. They have little hairs on them that the seeds just kind of float away in the breeze. And it is so pretty late in the fall when it does that. And these are evergreen to semi-evergreen. So if you do need something that provides sort of an evergreen backdrop, you can use these plants. All right, Itea or sweet spire. This is one that you see on almost every native plant list. It's in every rain garden. It's everywhere. And there's a good reason for that, because it has multi-season interest. So you have these bright little green leaves that come out early in the spring. You tend to have burgundy stems most of the year. These beautiful white, long drooping flowers or chains of flowers. So that's your spring interest. And then it has sort of a bronzy colored leaves throughout the summer and into the fall. They turn more of this sort of dark reddish color. So it's a really great plant for seasonal interest. One of the things you have to understand, though, about this plant, it is a multi-stemmed thicket forming plant, which means it's not going to stay in a compact little ball or shape. Now they have some that are regular size, and they have like dwarf ones like Little Henry or something like that, but it suckers and it spreads. So if you don't want a plant that's going to do that, cross this off your list. But if you've got space, if you're doing shoreline stabilization or something like that, and you want a plant that spreads and suckers like this to create a thicket, there are certain places in a landscape this is a very appropriate plant. So, all right, I just love this plant. This is buttonbush, obviously named for the flowers and the seeds on it that are really way cool. Again, it tends to be when I say medium to larger. I'm talking 6 to 8 feet in height, 6 to 8 feet in width. And again, that may not be appropriate for a foundation plant or, edge of the property plant or something. There are dwarfs. I think the dwarf one of this is called fiber optic, or at least that's one of the dwarf cultivars. But it's a really cool plant. Nice foliage, tolerates fluctuating water levels. So again, on a shoreline, in fact, it actually does a lot better if it's in a area that does get periodically flooded, or in a rain garden or something like that where it has more moisture. The leaves tend to get dull and thin out if it's in really dry areas. So, and it does tolerate some shade, so that's a good thing too for this one. And then, we like some of our plants to be a little more formal. That's one of the issues with native plants. People say, I'm all for natives, but they're just kind of gangly, straggly, unkempt looking. They're not really more manicured and refined looking plants. And in some cases that's true, and in other cases not. So if you're familiar with things like your boxwoods or your Japanese hollies, which are typical like foundation shrubs or background shrubs. Think about this one. This is a native holly, Ilex glaber or inkberry, and it's more along the lines of the boxwoods and the Japanese hollies. So it has the dark green shiny leaves. You can shear it into hedges or gumballs if that's your thing. It has berries on it, but they aren't real noticeable. It's a holly, but it's a blackberry, not a red berry on the hollies. The leaves don't have prickles or anything like that, and they're small. So it makes a really nice plant in a more formal type of a part of the landscape, if that's something you're interested in. And it doesn't have the root problems that the Japanese hollies and the boxwood has, and it is not susceptible to that boxwood blight disease that is causing so many problems right now. All right, so the trees, and again, all these plants are listed, scientific and common names on that handout, so that, if you see something that you like, you've got the name, you can go check it out more. So, all right, so small trees are trees that generally are under 30 feet, and medium trees are generally like 30 to 60. That 50, 60 foot range. So we're going to start with the smaller ones. Pawpaws, these are just fun. They have a fun shape. The leaves are kind of fun looking on the tree. Has a real interesting sort of that reddish bloom on it that you kind of have to look close to see. They're not really big and really stunning, but they are cool when you see them. And it is the biggest native fruit tree that we have. And so the pawpaws look like these little sort of green things here in the middle, kind of odd shaped, oval shaped. And then when you open them up, they have that yellow fruit with those big black seeds in there. And I'm told the fruit tastes something like bananas and pineapples. It's a very tropical tasting thing, certainly edible. You can grow the pawpaw as an individual tree, or if you have a lot of property, pawpaws can form thickets as an understory thicket. And if you're really interested in pawpaws, there's a pawpaw festival coming up later in the month up at, I think it's In View Plantation, up Newport News, I believe. And they do talks on pawpaws and give away seedlings and things like that. It's kind of a fun thing. But the thing to remember with pawpaws, if you just want the tree, that's fine. But if you do want the fruit, you need to have more than one pawpaw tree, and they can't be genetically the same. So you can't buy them from the same place. You have to buy one from one place and one from somewhere else, because they need different genetics in order for the fruit to form. So, and this is one of the ones that is provides very specific ecosystem services for being a host for the zebra swallowtail butterfly and the pawpaw sphinx moth, which again are very rare and important to some people. All right, the service berries. We've got 2 that can grow here in the Hampton Roads area, several that grow in Virginia. So we have the Canada and the Downy service berries. They can be single stemmed trees, but more often than not are considered multi-stemmed small trees. You can see they have beautiful white blooms in the spring, have a medium green, medium sized leaf to it that has a really beautiful orangey red fall color. Very, very striking against sort of the darker brownish gray bark. And then they have the berries on them. Again, this is edible by both the critters and us. If you can get to them before the birds or the squirrels get them, they're actually very good. But there's a short time period when they're perfectly ripe and ready to eat. And again, you have to kind of be on the lookout and get there before the critters do. But really nice, nice small tree. There are some cultivars out there for bigger berries or showier color. And again, these are all trees that are under that 30 foot. In a lot of cases, they're in that 20 foot range. All right, the dwarf hackberry. Oops, I apologize. Something is not correct on this slide. We had a scare right before the presentation. I brought up my presentation and pictures had moved around and are on different slides. All right, let me see what the next one does. Nope, I guess not. All right, so ignore these pictures. This is not the dwarf hackberry pictures, obviously. But most people are familiar with the larger hackberry trees, and they kind of got a bad rap as like a trash tree because they seed a lot, but they're actually fabulous trees. But there is a native naturally dwarf species called Celtis or Celtis, depending on how you want to pronounce it, tenuifolia. We have one at the research center. If anybody's interested in seeing it, you might have a little trouble tracking it down in the trade, but I've seen it at some plant sales and other places. Really nice. Kind of has a wide canopy to it. Kind of has a spreading canopy to it. Good medium green foliage. Very few any insect or disease problems. Moderately fast grower, and little teeny seeds on it, and good fall color, sort of I believe a yellowish orange fall color. So we'll move on from that one. Here's the fringe tree. Everybody loves the fringe trees. And these are really great. You can do it as a large multi-stem shrub, or you can do a single or multi-stem small tree by, limbing up the canopy a little bit. It's absolutely breathtaking in the spring, and it's called the fringe tree because it has these flowers on it that have these long, narrow petals that look like fringe. And they're on there for a fairly long time. Most often they're on there before the leaves actually start coming out, and are just really, really beautiful. They are kind of slow to moderate growers. So you're not going to get a lot of growth each year, but they do get up there eventually. And just a really neat tree. They don't mind damp or wet roots with periodic, inundation, like on a shoreline or in a rain garden. But they'll also tolerate it when it's pretty dry once they're established. All right, red buds. Everybody knows red buds, heart-shaped leaves, beautiful purple or lavender or pink flowers in the spring. Good understory tree if you've got shade that you're trying to get trees established in. And there's a lot of different cultivars out there. This is obviously not a sweet bay magnolia. But again, sweet bay magnolias, it's a deciduous to a semi-evergreen understory tree, good for shaded areas. Pale green leaves on the top, whitish to silver on the underside, so they really lighten up a darker area in the landscape. The magnolia blossoms that most people are familiar with, the white It has them, but they're just not dinner plate size, like with the southern magnolia, which is a large tree. These are about softball size, fragrant, and really nice. Again, an individual trunk or multi-stemmed. You can plant them as individual trees, or you can plant a grove of them. In fact, you'll see a lot more of these being used as street trees right now within Norfolk and Virginia Beach. Oh, I apologize. I am so very sorry that I don't have the right pictures for these. So the American hornbeam or musclewood, named musclewood because it's a light brownish gray bark that looks like rippling mussels. This is a very underrated tree. It's beautiful. It's a slow to medium grower, has a really beautiful canopy to it. Again, it's kind of a shorter tree in that 20 to 25 foot range with a broader, wider canopy to it. It is a really wonderful tree. And then this is also one that is particularly important to the eastern tiger swallowtail, the striped hair streak, and the red spotted purple butterflies. So, this is not a persimmon. The common persimmon, sometimes people have unfavorable memories of the persimmon tree because, if you eat it and it's not ripe, it will really pucker you up. But it really is a beautiful medium-sized tree, really pretty fall color. It does have fruit, but they generally, the fruit are not a big problem like some other trees that have fruit that's smelly or really prolific and causes a lot of debris that's undesirable. So really a nice one in the landscape. The blackjack oak, these are the right pictures. Go figure. Most people, when they think of oaks, you're thinking 100-foot trees. This one comes in at a nice 30 to 40, and sort of the thick leathery green leaves are not quite as big as a lot of the other oak leaves are. Small acorns, so you don't have a lot of debris from it, and just a nice overall shape to it. And again, an oak, which provides a lot of ecosystem benefits. Sourwoods, these are great, really pretty when they bloom, great fall color. Most people think these are small trees, but they're actually medium trees. They get in that 40 to 60 foot range, slow growers. And ones that are really great in the landscape, but you don't find them often in the trade. And then sassafras, another one that's really great fall color. This is cool because it's a good understory tree. It tolerates the shade, but the sassafras has 3 different leaf shapes, which is always cool. So they have, if you look at the picture in the top left, they have the sort of oval, solid oval. Then they have leaves that have like 3 big lobes on them. And somewhere on here, you can find one that looks like a mitten. It's got, one lobe off to one side. So from that standpoint, they're really kind of pretty, sort of a yellowy green color to the leaves, which is nice. Yellow fall color. And again, you can plant them as an individual, or you can plant them in a grove, or if you wait long enough, they will actually send out root suckers and create a grove of their own. So this is a tree that colonizes and forms its own thicket. So again, if you've got room for that, fine. If not, that's fine too. You can just keep those suckers dug up or cut off. So, and it has some interesting seeds on it too. Nope, and that's where I need to stop it because the rest of the trees are large trees, and not what we're focusing on tonight. So at that point, I think I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to the coordinators to see if there were any questions.
All right, I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if you have them, feel free to pop them in there, or feel free to come off of mute and just ask,
Okay.
whichever you prefer.
While we're waiting to see if any questions pop up, one of the other questions we get asked frequently is, where can you go look at trees? So that's really important too. And there's an abundance of places that you can go look at trees. The trick is to go look at trees in a place where they're labeled so that you know what you're looking at. So in the backs of those regional native plant guides, there are often lists of places to go look at plants. Some of your state parks have things labeled. The demonstration gardens at the research center have things labeled. Some of your extension offices have demonstration gardens. The botanical garden, of course, the zoo often has plants labeled. I'm trying to think where else. Chesapeake Arboretum has plants labeled. Old Dominion University campus has a tree trail on campus where they've identified and labeled a bunch of trees, and that map is actually on their website that you can look at it and download it before you head over there for a walk. So there's a lot of places that you can look at trees.
We do have one question. Instead of building a fence, I wanted to use trees. Can I plant them closer together?
Absolutely. I would go for the smaller ones, depending on, how tall you want your fence. I assume you're defining a property line or blocking a view, but absolutely you can plant them very close together when they're young, and then the canopies will grow together. And as the trunks get bigger, they'll work fine. And but they all kind of have to be planted at the same time and grow together to create that fence. If you don't want a straight line like a hard fence, you can, depending on how the canopies are going to grow, come off your property line a certain number of feet and do like offset planting. So it's staggered. So it's not such a straight line, because straight lines don't look natural. The other thing to do too is, if you're looking at a fence, you're talking property lines, you also need to think about how wide the canopy is, because it could go over into your neighbor's yard, and you may or may not want to have that happen, depending on your relationship with your neighbor, or whether or not you want to jeopardize your relationship with your neighbor. They may not appreciate your tree canopy in their yard. So let's see. Okay, again, just I encourage you to download the handout. I'm sure they're recording this to post it for later if you want to take a look. There is a poll to fill out. Please let them know your opinion so that they can keep the great programs coming. Oh, let's see. A tree for a corner bed that's 15 to 20 feet away from a pool. You need it small, obviously, and you need something that doesn't drop a lot of debris. So I would look at something definitely under 30 feet. Maybe go with a single stem instead of multiple, so that way you have less debris. You're always going to have debris. Find one that's got a small leaf versus a big leaf, because the big leaves don't tend to blow away. They tend to accumulate. And so I'm trying to think what would come to mind. Also, is it full sun or is it part shade too, would play a role. Some of the you might look at the serviceberry. Most of the time the berries don't ever fall off, they're eaten. So that's something like that. You could look at the sourwood, that has sort of medium leaves. Fringe tree, it's a great tree, but it has a wide canopy, and when the fringe falls off, that's kind of bad. But yeah, just kind of go back through the list. And again, I didn't have the pictures, so maybe if you type in the name and hit into Google and hit images, you'll see a lot of the images come up, and I will correct this presentation and with all the slides and get it to the master gardeners to post.
All right, we had a follow-up question about the fence instead of a tree. Trees instead of a fence, I apologize. Would you plant all the same tree for that tree fence, or would it be better to have lots of different types?
That's part of that client analysis that I talked about. What is the preference? If you plant all the same tree and you're kind of putting them in a line, that tends to be a little more formal looking, if that's what you're going for. If you're doing it as an offset planting, where you plant, maybe you've got 30 feet and you're putting 2 or 3 rows of trees in, but they're staggered so that you're creating more of a grove that's more randomized. Then I would go with several different species, some taller, some shorter, the sunnier ones on the edges, because as the middle ones grow up, they'll create the shade canopy. So mix and match. If you're doing the offset planting in a wider kind of border situation, all the same if you're going for a more formal linear design.
All right, and we have one more. If digging up a non-native bush, do you need to let the soil regenerate before planting a native bush?
No, no. It's always a good idea to do a soil test just so you have some baseline data to tell you what you've got. But no, you don't have to let the soil regenerate or go back in and amend it or anything like that. But you should know your pH. You should know whether your nutrients are all there and available for that plant. And again, depending on if you've got really sandy soils or really clay soils, then some organic matter might help, just from a standpoint of, if it's sandy soils, the organic matter will help hold water to get those roots established quickly. If it's clay soil, the organic matter will break it up and help it drain better so that, again, the roots don't drown and they get established pretty quickly. So it's the soil texture or type that you've got, as well as your pH and nutrients. Soil test kits are available at your libraries, your extension office, our research center. In Virginia, they run $10 for your basic information. You do have to send them to the soil lab up at Tech, or you can always send your samples to private labs. I believe there are a couple of private labs. I think there's one in Richmond, and maybe a couple others around. But it's a good baseline data before you decide you need to do anything to the soil, if anything is needed. It helps you with that. You can't just tell about looking at it.
All right, we had one more come in. What's the quickest way to kill an invasive Formosa tree?
Oh, I assume it's actually mimosa, not Formosa. And yes, they are rather invasive. They drop acidic sap, so you don't ever want to have furniture or cars under them. Chopping it down does a pretty good idea, basically as close to the ground as you can get, and then spot treating any suckers that come back. They're generally short-lived trees in the landscape anyway, 15 to 20 years before they kind of die out. But yeah, it's great to have them alongside the road and really cool like that, but they really aren't good trees for landscapes. So yeah, I would cut down and then spray any resprouts with a broadleaf herbicide is what you're trying to do.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we have a question about soil pH testing and how reliable the pH paper, like the tests that you can buy from Amazon, are.
I think those are used more for testing the pH in water as opposed to soil. And so, I mean, sure, you could probably try it. I'm not sure how reliable it would be. My recommendation, and I'm sure any master gardener or extension agent's recommendation, is going to be to get a soil test. There are very specific processes that they put that soil through to determine the parameters like pH and all of your nutrient levels, and your cation exchange capacity and all of that stuff. And if you're going to get a soil test, don't let it scare you when they send the report back. Your agent or a master gardener can help you interpret it, but there's also a form that takes each category and explains what it is and what it means. So it's fairly easy to interpret those. And again, it's $10. So, and generally you don't do soil tests, but every 3 or 4 years anyway, if that. But I would always recommend a true soil test.
All right, that was the last one. I thank you very much, Lori, for being with us tonight.
All right, thank you. I'll get that presentation corrected and get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
It
have a good night, everybody.
All right. All right, that's it for tonight, everybody. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again in August to talk about edible plants for fall. Have a good night.